but why don't we go ahead and get started? Welcome. Welcome to Women on the Week, Roundtable Sharp Perspectives. As always, I'm Chuck Todd, Meredith Jacobs, CEO of Jewish Women International, joined by Jody Radorin, Editor-in-Chief of The Forward, and Felissa Kramer, Editor-in-Chief of JTA. So guys, I know we spent a lot of time talking about the election. I guess before we completely move on, I'd love to hear from both of you. What was it like leading your newsrooms, trying to cover this very unusual election season? And if you had some like big takeaways, or if you see things that you might think were unusual for this year, but are kind of maybe will stay with us in future elections. Jody, why don't I start with you?
I guess there are two distinguishing factors of this election from every other one I've covered. Well, not every other one I've covered, because 2000 obviously also had the delay. But the two big factors that were unusual were how long it took to get to a result. And I would say not the level of division, because it's been kind of a 49-49 country for a very long time. But I would say the depth and dehumanizing kind of character of the divisions, both within the Jewish community and across the board, the extent to which and the way that disinformation played into that divide. Like the idea that people just kind of literally don't believe that other people think differently from them, have no empathy for the idea of there being another side, and then do things like dismiss the idea of a result. So the extent to that, I think, very dismissive, dehumanizing, like divide in the discourse is something that has grown over the last few years, but that we've never really had animate an election in the way that this did. We've certainly never had the level of straight out falsehoods being circulated. We had this time, as last time, real problems with the predictive nature of polling. That's actually something that we've been kind of careening towards for at least 20 years, and has to do with some of the changes in technology and trust in institutions as much as it does with the dynamics of this particular campaign. So those things were all different here. And for me, obviously, I've spent my career in mainstream, non-Jewish, non-sectarian publications. So for me, the other big difference is just, being at the Forward versus the New York Times. We cover elections in a very different way. I would say the most important thing that we did in this election was our efforts through our Scribe platform and our opinion section, and also some reporting, to just really showcase the diversity of opinion in the Jewish community, and to do it in this empathetic and respectful way. We were not trying to figure out, had Trump supporting Jews changed their mind? We were trying to understand what makes them tick. And similarly with, the far left progressive Jews, what were they, they had made compromises with this candidate. What did they have to say? So we were really trying to get behind the numbers and get a little bit of humanity into the debate. And I hope we did that well. I don't know, what was different for you, Felissa?
Yeah, I mean, like you, I had never covered an election in a Jewish newsroom before. I had been in a single subject, like niche audience newsroom previously. And so the question of like, how much is this really about us and for us, or are we just very excited because we live in America and this is, for any American? So I kind of grappled with those questions as an editor previously, and certainly feel like those were real questions in our newsroom this year. And then there's the piece of it that's like, well, if you're a news hound, like you can't sit it out. I mean, one of the things I'm left thinking is that we also devoted a lot of our reporting to those polls, POLES, and I, on reflection, I wonder, like, could we have better represented the probable majority of American Jews who are neither a Trump supporter nor skeptical of Biden, right? Like most American Jews this was a comfortable election, a comfortable candidate for them. And I don't know that our coverage really kind of spelled that out in any way. So that's something on reflection that, you know, it's always a challenge as journalists, like change and tension is the most interesting thing, but sometimes the story really is the absence of that. And how do you represent that in a way that's engaging, I think is a question that I'm going to take with me going forward.
Interesting. Well, I look forward to seeing what happens with your coverage in future elections. Why don't we move now to coronavirus? Seems to be always the topic, but now that we're hitting unbelievable milestones, record numbers, it feels like we're heading back towards lockdowns. I was just on a call with my staff where we were talking about, again, what does this mean when it comes to instances of domestic violence once we're back in lockdown situations. But let's talk about schools. There was an interesting article out this week about Jared and Ivanka and how their children are at the Berman Hebrew Academy here in DC. And they're in in-person classes with the understandings that the families will all safely quarantine. They'll wear masks, they'll social distance. And it seems that it became a concern when there was evidence that both Jared and Ivanka were not following those guidelines, and they've since removed their children from school. So, Felissa, you have little kids. Well, you both have children in schools now. How are parents handling this? Really, not only elementary school and younger, but also college kids. Colleges are now like, go home for Thanksgiving and do not come back.
So yeah, I mean, we broke that story, and I just want to correct the record. They were at a different school, Milton Gottesman, and now have moved to Berman. So they are now enrolled at Berman. And yes, as I'm editing it, I'm thinking, this is a political story. Like usually where people send their kids to school is fairly off limits, but here it really intersects with a big public health question. And so we've decided it was not off limits. So as I'm editing, I'm certainly thinking as a parent, like, this is the nightmare. Like, I'm sending my child to school every day, really trusting all the other parents to uphold the protocols that the school has laid out. And like, none of the other parents in kindergarten is like on TV. Like, I don't know what they're doing. And it is unnerving. I think, always when you're part of a community of any kind, you're trusting in everyone else to keep each other safe. But in this moment, like, we can see lapses and we can feel them, and the lapses have very clear results. And I mean, maybe this is a good thing, where in this moment we're reminded about what it means to be in a community. I'm also reminded about how just lucky I am that I am sending my kid to school as cases rise, and most children in America have not been going to school. Most school districts have been offering in-person classes, but there are a lot of small school districts with not that many kids in them. Most kids in America are learning at home. And I think we've given up for the year about figuring out a way out of that. And maybe it's not possible from a public health perspective. Maybe it would have been, but it's not going to be. And that is a real tragedy that we are not going to know the cost of for a very long time.
Right. It's like an entire school year.
Yeah, my twins who are in 8th grade are some of those kids. They are in school upstairs right now. They go to public school in our town, and the town was very late compared to others in New Jersey to have a plan to go hybrid, not remote only, but there was a lot of Sturm and Drang around it. The plan is, I think, pretty terrible and cuts back the hours of learning for everybody by a lot. Anyway, it was supposed to start November 1st. It got pushed back. We just got a notice this week that it's getting pushed back again. Most people do not believe it will start until at least after the new year. And meanwhile, there's crazy stuff happening. We're getting a ton of email about school pictures. They want everybody to come to the parking lot and have their school pictures taken, which feels like the stupidest thing ever. We got an emergency call testing the emergency alert system the other day when there were heavy rains, saying it was a test about delays or cancellations of school, which of course, they don't go to school, so they don't need to have a rain delay. Anyway, it was kind of, I mean, I know it's really hard. One of the things I'm really glad, I said last night on a different Zoom that I was really glad I didn't have to solve the peace, the conflict between Israel and Palestine. And like, I'm really glad I don't have to decide what a school district should do. But there's lots of examples of public and private schools doing a lot better than others. I also think we're with the spikes too. We're reporting right now a story about how Jewish day schools, but also like a lot of modern Orthodox synagogues have been having in-person services outside. What are they going to do now that it's getting colder? A Jewish COVID drama I am living intensely right now is changing B'nai Mitzvah plans. My kid's B'nai Mitzvah is a week from tomorrow. We are supposed to be having an outdoor open house for a very select group. I don't know how possible that's going to be. We have relatives coming in from out of town and from college campuses. We're all getting tested. We're all trying to be as careful as possible. I mean, it's just funny reliving this from March, and it does feel different this time. Like we know what it looks like, and people and hospitals are more prepared, and we know how to do things like go outside safely. So it doesn't feel quite as crazy and terrifying, but it is depressing to just kind of feel like you're right back there again. And I think what Felissa said at the beginning, I'll shut up in a sec, but this thing has been the best embodiment of Kol Yisrael Arivim Zeh Lazeh, like of anything, right? This idea of people are responsible for each other, which is not a bad principle to figure out a little bit, and maybe not a bad antidote to some of the divisions we've seen. It's not a bad parenting technique to talk about people being responsible for each other. So that's a comfort, I guess.
I agree. And I know, I don't even know that I would have thought about, you think about how the children are gathered into their little pods that they go through school. And I don't know if I even went to, well, wait, how are their families and what are their families doing? And had it not been for the Kushners making the news on this. And I do, my mind is going to the colleges because, my son is a college senior, and where he's chosen to quarantine at home. I know from stories about his friends who are on campuses who are getting sick or at parties where the kids are sick, they're all going to go home, and then there's going to be waves of that. And then I heard from someone that the college kids are testing positive, but they're completely asymptomatic. So they could be carriers. And then you think that with Thanksgiving and any we've told our family, we'll see you next year. This is not the time to bring the grandparents in.
I think what you're talking about is something that we are now accustomed to, which is a complete absence of federal response or any leadership here. Like, it did not make sense for colleges to bring students back in person. It did make sense for districts to figure out how to get young children into classrooms with teachers. It may make sense for cities to say to keep schools open and close restaurants, although I think there's an argument to be made if and can you guys hear me? I see I'm on the wrong network. I'll switch in a second.
No, you're fine.
Okay, great. There may be an argument to be made that when the in-person learning that's being offered in districts right now is so limited and scattershot that maybe it doesn't make sense to close restaurants before schools. But like, none of this is being talked about in an irrational or clear way with any kind of leadership. Like, and I think we kind of have like just gotten used to that, but that is not okay. And it could be different. It couldn't be different. We couldn't not have the virus, right? We couldn't not have the virus. Everybody's got but it could feel different. And some of this, we are in it together feeling, I think we could have that fostered for us.
Right. And just for some of the universities that said it was completely virtual, parents still got off-campus apartments for their kids. So
Evanston, Illinois is filled with college students right now.
So two of those college students are my niece and nephew in Evanston, and I also have one at Penn and one up at Syracuse, and obviously plenty of friends with kids in college. And it's been so interesting to me how different it's been at these different places. Syracuse in particular is like so totally on it. Now they have some advantages. They're in the middle of nowhere, essentially.
But they're sending
Um,
the kids home now and saying, don't come. They're shutting down
they
because
always said they were going to be home between Thanksgiving and the end of the year, but they've had this incredibly cool system of the way they do their initial round of testing is through wastewater, and then they isolate locations in dorms that have problems. They have quarantine dorms, and there's just been totally small numbers of cases there. My other two, who are at Northwestern and at Penn, there's tons of cases and there's tons of available testing. My nephew said my niece is leaving Northwestern for the week to prepare to come here after she gets her test. And my nephew at Penn he said he's going to get nasal swabs 5 times next week because you can like walk in and get your test so easily. But they've all been in houses with friends who've had COVID, and they go into like tighter quarantine, and they're very worried. I mean, they're totally worried about being around my parents. And we're just doing whatever we can to protect ourselves.
Yeah, and I think some of the challenges with the universities also is when the students are in university housing, they can control it a little better.
Right.
It's the kids who are coming back in off-campus apartments, and the schools can say, what are they going to do? They're having the
I
party.
think what Felissa said about leadership is so interesting, just because it's like, I mean, Joe Biden said in his statement on Monday, masks have become a political statement. I did an event with Michael Oren months ago where he sort of said the same thing. He's like, if in America, if you wear a mask, you're a Democrat. And Israel, the idea that wearing a mask or protecting your neighbor or trying to control this disease became a divisive issue based on politics and or geography, like didn't have to be that way, hasn't been that way around the world. This is really not a political issue in any kind of normal political framework. A public health crisis is a public health crisis, and the difference between a Democratic and Republican response would be very narrow. I'm sure there would have been some differences in exactly how the stimulus package should work or how the shutdown of the economy should work, but really the idea that it was somehow a political statement of how much you would care about whether people were dying, or even the acknowledgement, the empathetic acknowledgement of a leader of death, those things are not normal, and they didn't have to be. And that, I mean, I presume we can come out of that, if not in this public health crisis, then in whatever we face next. I mean, it's not based on like logic or ideology. It's a strange manipulation of those things.
The big question in this transition to a new leader is like, can the fever break a little bit, and can we debate on different terms, and can facts reinfuse the conversation? And I think that it's really deep, right? It's a really deep problem that we have, and this will be an early test. Like, if maybe change is possible, and then we will see it soon, and that would tell us something, I think, of where country can go.
I mean, I think there's already some signs, right, of, we started the week with like virtually no Republicans calling out the lie of election fraud, and very few saying president-elect, and there's been a steady change in that, and the kind of the people promoting disinformation it's getting to be a more isolated group. I do think that coronavirus, I mean, we may be too late in the arc of this event, but it is of the kinds of issues that have led to this division, it's the type of one that you would think there could be something. I mean, it is affecting everybody. It is affecting everybody across class, across geography, across politics. And it is, sad. People are dying and sick. And the basic idea that Americans would feel terrible about anybody who's dying, like, used to be very normal. So I feel somewhat hopeful that we could get back to that place. And obviously there also was good news this week about a vaccine. So, if we get to a vaccine sooner rather than later, that's widely available and reliable, and we take some of this bizarre toxic manipulation of this issue out of the political realm and more into the public health realm, maybe.
Right. And I think you're right. Something you said in the beginning, yes, it's the debate between, which party you're aligned with or who you're listening to, but it also has become an issue of like your individual rights, as if your individual right has been impeded by being forced to wear a mask, rather than thinking of it as what you're doing is helping others. So there's like almost like a point of view that's been
I
skewed
mean,
so bizarrely.
look, I don't think that it's not an illegitimate point of view. Your individual right is being, I mean, the one of the basic principles of America is you can do whatever you want until it screws somebody else in a real serious way. I was shocked in March how quickly Americans gave up a lot of their First Amendment rights. Without a lot of debate around it. And I don't think the idea of people questioning some, like, don't I have the right to open my business? I mean, there's real tension between these two things, between the public health imperative and the kind of freedom to be who you want to be imperative. I think the way it has played out has been really distorted, but I don't think there's nothing to it. I mean, people do have the right to, do some, that is a fundamental part of America. And the fact that some of the countries that were able to clamp down on this quickly are places where people don't have a lot of freedoms and rights is also worth noting. I mean, one of our big problems here, though, does also root back to states' rights. This idea that these states are really separate entities and we don't have a unified policy seems particularly crazy when you're talking about something that obviously has no idea where these borders are. So and you can see the difference between Europe and us in that, or you at least could earlier.
Interesting.
I was just thinking about I wrote, I don't know, 6 weeks, 8 weeks ago, maybe. I interviewed, I don't really know when it was at this point. I interviewed Alex Goldstein, who is a Jewish man in Boston who has taken on this onerous task of cataloging COVID deaths for a Twitter account called Faces of COVID. And he really was bringing a lot of kind of a Jewish spirit, I think, to this challenge. And he's been plugging away at it. And just this week he tweeted, like, it feels too big. Like, he took on something too large, and that he feels, and it feels like he feels alone in continuing to be watching these names and faces accumulate. And I think that really is, like, it is too big. Like, who can imagine the numbers that we're in? And I don't know what to do with that, except that I'm thinking about him and the challenge he's taken on, and how can we all share in it, because somehow sharing in that might help us gain the will and resolve to get through the next 6 months that are going to be extremely difficult, much more difficult than anything we've gone through yet.
And I wonder if it's how much you might know it theoretically, but I sometimes feel like I'm in such this wonderful safe bubble, knock wood. And I was reading something talking about the early days back in March in New York, and what it was like for people living in New York, and even seeing like the refrigerated trucks carrying the bodies from the morgues. And that like hit me visually. I was like, oh my God, to live through that, where I was just in my little neighborhood, going to the supermarket with my mask and not feeling it. And as someone like this this Alex who is charting it, to like be counting the numbers and like feeling it so is so strongly with what this is really doing, but how much we can kind of hide from it in a way.
So I would encourage anyone who is on Twitter to follow this, because it really is a moving exercise that should bear witness. And you can really see it's everybody. This virus does not discriminate. It does not care who it's meeting. I would also say that if you haven't seen it yet up close, I think you will.
I'm sure.
Where I'm sitting in Chicago, it's not good. It is not good, and it's getting bad very, very quickly. And I just actually heard from a friend from Massachusetts last night who said, my uncle is dying in an ICU at Northwestern Hospital of COVID. He's 80. He has nobody in the city. Do you know anyone? Can you help him see a chaplain or something? And like, I think the answer is no. People are still dying alone. And so I think if you haven't felt it yet, I think that we all will, maybe not in terms of seeing refrigerated trucks, but this is the numbers are
Absolutely.
terrifying.
Absolutely.
And we'll change how we live.
And I wonder, Jody, are you hearing anything? You brought up the vaccine, and every once in a while I hear someone say, "Oh, I don't know if I trust the vaccine. You shouldn't be the first round of people." What do you think? Are you hearing anything about how the vaccine is going? Are people going to rush to take it?
So I don't know. I've not done no reporting on this, and I can't even I wouldn't say that in my just casual life it's coming up very much. But I think this is one of the it's a prime example of how a change in leadership and in the framing of the discourse could just radically change um, the result here. So we had a president who was saying so clearly false things about the promise of a vaccine and tying it so clearly to his political future. We're going to get a vaccine before November 3rd. I mean, right? And he was so clear, and we're bypassing all these regulations. The way he talked about his own diagnosis and then his own treatment, and we're going to make this available to everyone. Those things undermined our confidence in the vaccine because he was literally just saying we're going around all of the ways that we normally do this to do this faster in time for you to like me more before election day. I mean, it was like very obvious to everybody. So because of the divisiveness, lots of Trump folks were like, great, I want that vaccine. And lots of anti-Trump folks were like, I would never take that vaccine. But those things didn't have much to do with how anybody feels about a vaccine. I think first of all, those things didn't happen. The vaccines now, that the news this week seemed to be talking about vaccines that were on a scientifically possible timeline and plan. There was much fuller information about the testing of them. And you can imagine if things continue that way, and if you start getting messaging from the White House that is not about like, I want there to be a vaccine in time for my re-election campaign, but we're going to do this in a very deliberate way, and we're going to have a plan for distributing the vaccine, and these are trusted companies, and this is what the test looks like, then there will be some people who won't take it. But I think in our society generally, people who right now, the anti-vaccine community are seen as real fringe outliers who are, ignoring real science. And there's many, many articles have been written about the false claims of the anti-vaccination movement. So I would presume it would come back closer to that norm. I mean, it's also true that a first vaccine is more controversial than an established vaccine, and it should be. But I think the extent, I mean, this is again where you get back to Kol Yisrael, I mean, it's just like, this disease has brought home to me and most people I know much more clearly than ever the way in which it's not about protecting yourself, it's about protecting your neighbor or your grandfather or whatever. And I think it's hard for me to imagine that for most people, a vaccine would not be seen that way. I think most people I think that there's a risk on the other side, which is we will rush to take the vaccine and we will think everything's fine, even though there are clearly studies showing that the first vaccines will only be partially effective, and that we won't really know how effective until we test it, and that that you're going to have to modulate the back to normalness. And I think it'll be very hard for people once there is a vaccine to continue to take some precautions, and having very, very clear guidance about what's okay and what's not and how to ladder the steps will be incredibly important.
And also I think good that that Biden has appointed Ron Klain as his chief of staff, who wasn't he the Ebola czar under Obama? So there's a lot of, I think, synergy.
And I think he's the first person Jody, tell me if I missed something here. First person I've seen enter the scene that nobody had an unkind word to say really about.
It's funny. That's probably right. I mean, other than the Ebola, I have to say, my concern, right, about this administration is that it's like living in the past. I mean, I think there's just been so much change and so much diversity, and I would like the country to be run by younger people who are more modern in their political roots. And I get how we ended up with a almost 78-year-old president-elect, but for me, Ron Klain, I mean, I don't know him that well, but it's a little bit, not only Obama, he's really like a Clinton Gore person. He was Gore's chief of staff 20 years ago. So I do think that the idea that I agree with what Felissa said, and I thought, there was a bunch of cool stuff about his particular brand of Judaism, and So I'm interested to see what it's like. And I certainly agree that having not just the COVID task force he appointed, but a chief of staff who's got experience with public health crises seems very, very smart. I hope that as we see more appointments, we will not feel like we are living in 2008 or 2000 or 1992. I hope we will feel like we're living in 2020.
If they could get us to one of those years where there wasn't a pandemic, and then we could go from there, I feel, like whatever needs to happen to bring this thing under control.
Right, I'm sure, but I'm just saying.
Thank you.
I mean,
Of course, no, I hear exactly what you're saying. And there's so much. I mean, there's so much.
Of course, is that we have Kamala Harris in the number 2 spot, which is the exact opposite. We have a young woman of color with a Jewish family who, none of those things have ever happened before. The fluidity of their familial and the intersectionality of all of that feels very, very 2020. And so my guess is we will have a little bit of both, and maybe a little bit of both is what we need, because there's the stability and the experience of the older generations and the diversity and the fresh perspectives of the new. Maybe that could be perfect. Anyway, I let's see who comes out. Do you have thoughts on what we're going to see, Phyllis? Any big Jewish names you're expecting to get big jobs?
We haven't really dug down into that. I know that I saw some list where Randy Weingarten, as all the Democratic administration, gets on the list. I don't think it's going to happen. My former colleagues at Chalk Beats pointing toward some people who are on the ground leading school districts who for better or worse are all K-12 people, which the Department of Education does a lot with higher ed. I think that this speaks to like we're getting into a moment where like it's going to be about the future, and we're going to see an exciting range of people. Surely see people who have been leaders in the Jewish world or Jewish leaders, like see them take prominent roles, and other exciting people. And we're going to start to see the future come into focus. And that is, as a journalist, a exciting place to be covering that question. Question now is,
if anybody on the call knows of Jews up for prominent cabinet positions, please let us know.
Yeah, exactly. We can divide up the exclusive first interviews.
All right, so somebody actually posted, I don't know, Judy, you wrote Dr. Mandy Cohen, North Carolina Secretary of Public Health.
I think she's just saying he'd be a good person.
Are you just nominating people? Is there some
anyway, feel free to,
we can also build, maybe this is a cross-publication initiative to build our dream Jewish cabinet in the world where we get to do such things.
And
it looks like we've got examples
for Treasury. So with that hopeful note of what's coming on the future, let's close out today. I just want to give a little housekeeping talk. So we'll be back next week, but the following week, November 27th, is the Friday right after Thanksgiving, and we're gonna all be with our whatever families.
The online shopping.
That day, so we will not be on. And then the following week, December 4th, is JWI's big virtual Women to Watch Impact Summit. It's a half day of incredible conversations of Jewish women, and Women on the Week will be live. We'll be joined not only Jody and Felissa, but also Allison Kaplan Summer from Haaretz will be on the panel looking at the year ahead for women and Jewish women. So you should have gotten a link. You will also be getting a link with the follow-up email with this recording. And I do hope you donate in order to get your link and join us on December 4th. With that, I thank you, Jody. Mazel tov on the upcoming B'nai Mitzvah. I hope it goes incredibly well.
It happens, whatever it is, it's the milestone is there. So.
Yes, enjoy.
And we have the sweatshirts also. So we have, Zoom, we have Torah portions and Divrei Torah, and we have sweatshirts.
What is there a theme? What's on the sweatshirt? Is it just their names or what's
It's a logo that my daughter designed. It's on the sweatshirts. It was on the invite, the Zoom invite. It's on some surprise things that I can't say out loud in case any of their friends are watching. It's very
I'm
cool.
sure their friends are watching this.
I'm sure.
We're very big with the 13.
Yeah, we're the swag industry is doing fine in the Zoom Mitzvah era.
Wonderful. Well, I can't wait to hear all about it and just wishing you all so much love. And
Thank you.
thank you all. Shabbat Shalom. As always, be safe.
Thank you.